Hey, everybody, it is Richard Harris with another edition of the Surf and Sales podcast. I'm flying solo today. My partner in crime is traveling. I think he's off to his fantasy football draft. So we all wish Scott the best. And, it's a league he's never invited me to be a part of. So I will have to talk trash about him for the rest of this podcast. In all seriousness, though, I'm really excited. This is a guest. I've been on his podcast. He'll tell you about his podcast. His name is Ben Wright. He's from Australia, dialing in from Australia. So he got up at the crack of dawn. I think it's about 6:15 a.m. his time, which we appreciate. So Ben, welcome to Surf and Sales. I'm sorry my partner's not here because you have a surfboard behind you and he'd love to ask you about it. But tell people a little bit about you. What's the name of your company, what you do, all that kind of stuff. And we'll kind of go from there.
Oh, thank you, Richard. Lovely to be on your show, and thanks for having me. I tell you what, it's never a problem getting up at the crack of dawn here because if you can picture where I live, I'm on half an acre. We have some beautiful grounds around us, but we're 3 kilometers from one of the most beautiful beaches in the world. And when I say beautiful, I mean we host the World Longboard Championships here pretty regularly. It's places that people go to have their holidays in from all around Asia Pacific. So I'm really fortunate. So when that sun's coming up and I'm awake, there's never a problem for me ever.
Do you allow people from the Bay Area, such as myself, to bring our kids and wives and come stay at your house, do your Airbnb your house? So
well, we had one of those nasty experiences when we did rent out our house where things just weren't right when we came back. So my wife very clearly said no more.
No more.
But we do have spare bedrooms as long as my ferocious young daughter isn't occupying one of them. But we love having visitors here because sometimes when you live in a special place, you got to share it.
Knowing my kids, particularly my older son who loves to surf, he'd be like, no, 3 kilometers isn't close enough. We got to get on the beach. So, but we'd certainly come and have a beer with you and go to dinner and, see you. But So sorry, go ahead and tell people about your organization and what you do. Because, you and I and Scott are cut from the same cloth about helping salespeople. So let people know what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And to do that, I'll go backwards for a moment. And please forgive my husky voice. I've come off a man cold from the last week or so, and I think that's a testament of just going a little bit too hard at times. But so for me, I was the corporate citizen, if you like. I came through school, through university, did really well, was really lined up for a long corporate career, and had about 12 years or so in corporate running. Well, by the end of it, running sales teams for large multinational or global businesses, in particularly the fast-moving consumer goods, so food and retail, and the healthcare industries. And I remember really distinctly that I was sitting with my manager at the time in his office, and we'd had a pretty good year. It was solid. We'd done a lot of good things, but I could feel this overwhelming sentiment of my manager taking what I'd said, rephrasing it into his words and including I instead of we, and really positioning himself to how he could push up the line that it was his result and his job. And at that moment I went, I need to take control.
All right. I want to dig in right there. When you have that self-centered leader, right, who doesn't get the team aspect, right? They only see the M and the E in the word team, right? Did it take you a long time to realize that's how he was? Like that you were like finally having this epiphany? Or once you once you realized it, did you see, oh, wow, he's always been that way?
It's a really interesting question because I think for me, generally, I'll make assumptions pretty quickly about people based on your first interactions with them. And I think a lot of people do that. But you always want to give people the benefit of the doubt and time that allows you to have a more grounded appreciation for what they do. So looking back, I absolutely knew it. But in the moment, and I worked under this leader for about 12 months. I was in that role for a lot longer, but he was a new leader to the role. You like to think that they might grow into the role or that they will show some behaviours at times, but you can work with them and they have a more level approach across the journey. But no, this leader certainly didn't. And for me, what made it really easy to then say, I'm going to take control was that he wasn't investing into me. And it's something that I spend a lot of time teaching now about.
Yeah.
Is engagement of your team is so
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
So important.
So what are those? And the reason I'm digging here, right? Because a lot of our listeners have been through this or might be going through this. What are there any red flags now that you've been through this, you went through this, and now that you're teaching people how to engage with their teams, and we're going to dive into that in a bit. But what are the red flags that a younger person earlier in their career, someone in their 20s or 30s, that doesn't mean you need to quit. It just means that you want to be aware of what's happening around you. Are there any suggestions you have for people who are listening?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the green flags, if you like, or one of the most positive signs I see, and I always try to refer to things in the positive rather than the negative. One of the signs that I see of leaders who are invested in their people are those who spend time in personal development outside of that annual PD meeting. You know, those meetings where we come into and we're always a little bit apprehensive. What grade am I going to get? Is it meets expectations? Is it exceeds expectations? How is that going to contribute to my overall REM or my bonus structure? And then we'll talk about the Excel course or the negotiation course that I need to do over the next 12 months. The leaders that really nail this are the ones that take that moment in time and they apply it through your day-to-day behaviors or habits that you have as a team. So if you're having your regular one-to-one meetings where you're getting together with your leaders, that it's regularly coming up, right? Here's your learning plan. Here's what we're going to do about it. They're taking moments in time to say to the team, right, let's pause. What's the learning moment here? Or what did we do well that we need to copy, paste, and repeat? What didn't we do so well that we need to review, refine, and then re-roll out? So those type of leaders.
Sorry, everybody. Somehow my recording stopped, and I don't know why. But we're back with Ben, and finish that last part. And again, I'm just going to summarize real quick. And I loved how you said it, which was when you're leading your team, to pause and say, what is the learning moment here? What is this piece to reconfirm? Which is very different because I'm a sales trainer too. And I often say, well, what's working? What's not working? Or what do you think? And I loved how you phrased that because it really does confirm that they've either got the learning moment or you need to spend a few more minutes on it not, my interpretation is in a non-confrontational way. So I know we got cut off as you were in your thought, but where were you going to take it from there?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I was talking about was that as a leader, we sit down with our teams and we say, right, what did we do at that moment in time that worked really well?
Good God. So happens again. I'm not touching anything, Ben. So I have no idea what's happening.
Life and technology happens. Yeah. I completely get it. Shall I continue?
Yeah, go for it until it stops again. So
it'll be one of the most staccato podcasts in history with my deep dulcet tones. So and perhaps it's my Australian accent it doesn't like, but so we take that moment in time and we say, right, what have we done as a team here that's worked? And what's really important there is that for me, team growth is about learning, but it's often about remembering things that we once knew that we perhaps have forgotten because the shifting sands of time have come in. But the idea is to say, right, what worked and how do we do it again and again and again and again? Because a great sales process for me isn't about having a script. I'm not a script type of guy, but I am a process guy that says, let's make sure that when we go into a meeting, we're not thinking about how we're going to run that meeting. That comes naturally because we can then spend our time listening and building relationships with our customer rather than worrying about, am I going to balk left or right? Am I going to jump high or low? And the second part to that is then we take a look at what perhaps hasn't worked, where we can review it, refine it, and re-roll it out, again, in a repeated manner. So the leaders that take that time to stop, say, hey, how can we learn? How can we grow? How can we get better? They're the ones that I love to work with. And they're the ones I used to love to work for, but in this instance, didn't quite have one.
So will you repeat that line again? It's not what we learn, it's what we remember. Is that right? Is that
for me,
the golden nugget?
Yes, I love a good. I call them silver bullets. I say we've got silver pellets or we've got silver bullets. Silver pellets will be lots and lots and lots of little things that will make up the silver bullet. And that's often where we end up. Silver bullets, obviously, being that beautiful moment. Gold's too expensive for me these days.
Yeah. So I love that. Well, thanks for sort of backing up and let's diving into that. But, again, think people get a sense that, you're a sales trainer, sales coach, sales leader, all those things. Go ahead and tell them the name of your company. Go ahead and tell them what you do. You've certainly earned the right to say it. And we'll dive into some other stuff I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to finish off the story around it, at about 30, I left the corporate career, and I then went and spent 10 years in my own businesses. It'll only take a moment, but what's important here is one of those businesses grew really quickly. It was in the renewable space, so it was clean tech, so it was a really good, heartwarming business, regardless as to how it went. But we won Fast Growth Company Awards. We grew 0 to 40 mil revenue in about 7 years, which is pretty quick. It's certainly not a unicorn, but that business had some really successful moments, and then was sold to one of the largest energy players in Australia. And we're talking
Wow.
about a multi-billion-dollar balance sheet. And then with that, there were a few businesses around the edges there that were also very successful. So post that moment in time, turned late 30s, I'm 41, almost 42 now. And I'd had a 12-year corporate career. I started at 19, and almost 10 years in the entrepreneurial world, right? And there'd been some merging of time, right, between those two. For me, it was then about moving into the areas that I knew were my relative superpowers. So for me, my skills that were strongest in my repertoire, and that wasn't comparing me to anyone, but my relative superpower being sales strategy. So I don't necessarily call myself a sales trainer. I'm not that person that walks in and runs a session on objection handling. But what I do is work with leaders and teams around their strategy. So we build it out and then we implement it. And as we're building that out, what happens, and the business is called Stronger Sales Teams, is that as we're building that strategy, we find the gaps. Those areas that perhaps in that sales process we're not strong enough in, and that we need to spend some time or some moments in time strengthening. And that's where that training and education piece comes out, which then generally rolls into coaching. So Stronger Sales Teams is what we're called, and strategy really is our game.
And do you, so I'm in the States, right? So I live in a certain bubble of, not always, but mostly the startup world. So there's a lot of founder-led go-to-market sales strategy stuff that I do. Do you work with the smaller organizations at that level to focus on that strategy? Or are you, no, I've moved away from that, and I really like working with these companies that actually have a sales team, because that's just, that's my niche. That's what I know.
Yeah. We hear a lot about niches, and in our industry, the more you niche down, the more attractive you are to certain industries. I have some niches, and that is generally I'm going to be working with teams over individuals. That's the general approach.
Mm-hmm.
However, I say that with an element of caution, because I'm one that believes in the further that you stretch your experiences, the better your skill base becomes. The higher that skill base rises, like the pyramids, bigger the base, the higher the peak, or even the skyscraper, if you like. So for me, I actually work with a number of small businesses, because I love the principles that you can take from big business and roll in.
Yeah.
And I stretch that through to my largest customers, about $5 billion in annual revenue. And I have 3 or 4 customers in the $1 billion range. So
Right.
generally, the areas I actually tend to avoid is the really heavy tech-driven startup space. They work in slightly different cycles to what I do, but I'm very much in the sales teams, B2B, B2C space, that are out there meeting with their customers. So those that have sales cycles that are beyond transactional, and need strategic approaches, need multi-touch points, not those phone companies, one moment, one sale. Generally not so much my jam.
So
but I really enjoy that stretch.
Yeah. So I'm curious, why not the tech companies?
Yeah, I think it's more by being a product of where I've had experience rather than a lack of targeting. I certainly have worked with businesses that focus on tech. I mean, our business, the renewables one that grew, we had a really heavy tech focus in there ourselves. So I have had plenty of experience. Sometimes where you end up is as Simon Sinek, I think, says, is crossing the river by feeling the stones. And it's I've built up lots of experience in the renewables industry. Lots in healthcare, lots in fast-moving consumer goods.
So you went where you knew where your knowledge base was, right? Like you knew your ICP.
Exactly right. But as we say that, at the moment, I'm working with a finance company. They're a brilliant company, and I'm always very careful around confidentiality. But they are heavy tech based, and they are a $300 million a year business. who have a huge requirement on the tech that they work with, and
Right.
I love doing that.
Yeah.
So that's where I say is we tend to stretch across a lot of industries, but for me, the key driver is to have sales leaders who want to grow.
Yeah.
That tends to be more my niche.
And do you focus on because there's questions behind this question. Are you teaching sales leaders how to be sales leaders, or are you teaching salespeople how to get better based on a new strategy, or both?
Yeah, it's a good question. And one that you can never answer with just one straight sentence. But if we had to put into a nutshell, my job is to take a sales leader and get them to step in the shoes that they want to fill. Because it is without doubt for me the hardest transition, individual contributor through to managing a team. You're out there, you're doing an incredible job at selling. You're hitting quotas, you're smashing targets, and your confidence is high. But you start to think about what's next. What am I going to do
Yeah.
next? And your leaders in your business go, oh boy, I've got to do something here, otherwise he or she's going to leave. And you
Yep.
get thrown into this sales leader role, and it's often in a situation where the leaders say, gee, they're good at selling. They're going to be a great people leader, and they'll work it out. But traditionally, where you get your support, lots at the individual contributor level. So salespeople will get lots of support from their business. Lots at the top exec level. They'll get executive coaches, they'll have boards, they'll have lots of time. But those management levels in the middle, where you're moving through often at a rapid pace as you grow your career, you don't tend to get as much support there. And it can be really difficult moving from a master of sales.
Yeah. So this is the question behind the question,
Yeah.
which is, what is the top one or two things that you see these managers lacking, and oftentimes through no fault of their own, today in 2024? And what is the suggestions you offer up to them? Because we have a lot of leaders here, who listen, and so I'm trying to give them something to walk away with. So, but in 2024, where's their gap in a consistent level? Granted, you can't overgeneralize, but you probably see the same thing a little bit over and over.
No, absolutely. So we did a research project. It was actually last year, so it's now 9 or 10 months out of date. But that research project was very, very clear. It said the number one challenge for sales leaders globally, and we used primary and secondary sources, the number one challenge is to get the most out of their team. So the area that I recommend, one of the two that sales leaders start on, is learning how to get the best out of their people. And that is training, that is coaching, that is engagement, and it's a level of emotional intelligence that translates into emotional engagement. So there's a piece there around learning how to really, really drive talent. And then the second piece for me, and it's funny, I haven't been asked this question before, but the answers were really straight at the top of my head, straight into my prefrontal cortex. And the second piece there is around having a structure around how you build your team. I have 5 parts of the structure that I run that any high-performing team needs to tick off to get right. But if you have a structure or a playbook that you can then roll out with your team, your annual strategic planning, your day-to-day interactions, your how you manage your team, it all becomes a lot more straightforward and repeatable because you're working with a system.
Yeah. Without giving away too much, and you could say, well, Richard, they got to pay me for this. When you build your team, what are those 5 pillars?
Yeah. I'm always happy to share anything that can help your listeners. I'm all in for. So 5 pillars is number one is have a strategy. So, and that's not a back of the envelope. We are aiming to grow by 24% and increase our margins and pick up 8 new customers. Not that. This is a proper strategy that has 3 to 5 key goals with action plans built behind them, right? And you know how you're going to implement. Number 2 is to get your sales process written down onto one page. And again, every sales leader I work with say, yes, we have a sales process. And then I say, can you step me through it?
Yeah.
Can you step me through it? And they're like, whoops, right? It gets really difficult. So sales process.
We have a demo. We have a demo. First, we have a phone call. Then we have a demo, right? That's the process.
Yeah. Then we objection handle. Then we close. And then
right. Exactly.
Yeah. So get that written down. And the reason I like to do that is the prime reason is it shows you gaps. It's actually not about working out what you're good at. It's about finding where your gaps are to improve. Number 3 is around sales processes. Pardon me. Number 3 is once you've got your sales process, it's into metrics, rituals, and celebrations. So you measure progress, you celebrate progress, and you have some rituals around it that give you confidence that the team is moving forward. Number 4, a training program. And I am polarizing on this. It's for me, training should be every single week. And the
Yep.
reason being is that you often learn as a sales leader, as much as your team, from being able to get that interaction back and forward, that you don't get in your weekly sales meeting. And number 5 is a coaching program. So we talk about training being knowledge transfer, but coaching is enhancement of that knowledge. And that's how do we take everything we're learning and repeat it again and again and again, predictably, when we're in front of customers. And that's where your coaching framework comes in. So they're your 5, Richard.
Yeah, that's great. I hope a lot of people listen to that. And I think it's brilliant. Like that's what people need to understand. And then figuring out what's customized for them based on not just their ideas of a strategy, but what's reality giving you. Because I know you well enough, Ben, that's like, okay, we wrote this down on September 6th for the first time, and October 6th is going to change, right? If not sooner, right?
Mm.
We're going to adjust things in our strategy. We might have to adjust things in our process. We might have to adjust things in our, what we're measuring, right? And I love that. And I really love the part where you talked about, say them again, the 3 things, but one of them was measuring. Then
so metrics, celebrations, and rituals.
So define the difference between a celebration and a ritual.
Yeah, good question. So celebrations can be 2 parts here. We're celebrating progress. So when we get something that isn't necessarily a result, it might be a process, or it might be something that's going to lead to that pot of gold. And the result is when we get a win, typically a customer win. So a celebration is a moment in time when we will applaud a job done against a specific item. So Richard Harris, he delivered an epic training session around storytelling. Tick, we're going to celebrate that, Richard. And I love using old school candy is one of my favorite go-tos. And I should tell you a story about WizFizz in a moment. But so we'll do that. We'll celebrate at a moment in time. Rituals are things that we do all day, every day, repeatedly. And the best example for me of a ritual is what we bookend the start of our day with, and we bookend the end of our day with. Right? And these are behaviors that will generally lead to wins or progress that we can be celebrating. And my favorite is when I actually focus time on heavy strategic thinking. I have set times when I do that, and I diarize it, and that's a ritual that I can follow.
So, and I'm really glad to hear you explain it, because, you can hear metrics and you can hear celebration. Like, so many people will see metrics, call count, emails, number of conversations, right? There's valuable things. Like, those are things that we do need to pay attention to. But then the celebration, as you called it, is about a job well done in relation to a particular goal, not just did we close the deal, right? And that's all about positive feedback and encouraging and, giving support to our team. And then the other piece about ritual, I like, because it's not, a power hour is a ritual, or, now we're going to all do research for 30 minutes and then get on the phone at the same time. Like, that's not a ritual that Ben's talking about. Rituals, as I understand what you're saying, are what are your high level strategic things that may be able to help you, that you think about to help you figure out the right metrics or the right celebrations, or what is a new metric or a new celebration or something else entirely. But I just want to make sure people don't hear the word ritual and think it's, we call for this many hours a day and we do this for so many hours a day. At least that's my interpretation anyway.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It can be something as simple as understanding the way you work. So for me, I recognize that I get excited. I can bring great energy to a room, and when I'm upset, I can suck that energy out of the room. But when I get excited, I'll often jump in really quickly when a pause would be more appropriate. So I've got a little ritual where I'll pinch between here on the thumb, right between my thumb and my hand. It used to be 3 deep breaths, but I'm too impatient for that. And I'll just pinch that, and just for a moment, and it'll just slow me down.
Right. Yep.
And then I'll go.
Yeah, I usually just say, I'm going to shut up now. I've been talking too much.
Ritual. So that could be a ritual for you.
So this is really great, Ben. And in a minute, I'm going to turn it around to you and see if there's a question you'd like to ask. But what else? I know you've been working on this new prospecting stuff. And again, I know you're willing to share knowledge. So 2 things before you give the prospecting stuff. tell people about your podcast. How can they get in touch with you if they are interested in learning more about your business, or maybe they need something from you? How do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Well, we actually have a second podcast running, about to start, but our major podcast is called the Stronger Sales Teams Podcast. So the Stronger Sales Teams Podcast. It's on Apple, Spotify, all your major directories out there. You can find it. It is now. It's a top 5% globally rated sales podcast. Sometimes you get there by attrition. Other times good content, and we like to think it's through good content. So
Of
we
course.
we are short, punchy, 25-minute podcasts that very much follows this type of theme. Right, I agreed to be a guest on your
Yeah.
podcast because I like your style.
Yeah.
The second one's actually called Friends in Business, which is about to kick off. So Friends in Business, it's with a lady named Jemima Ashley, and we have very different lenses on the world, but she's had a very successful podcast previously. So that kicks off at the very end of well, certainly by the time when you're listening in October here, we're up and running. So that one there, again, short, punchy, and we cover more general business topics.
Got it.
So
Got
perhaps
it.
one day we can have you on board and have a chat as well.
Cool. So, but how can people get a hold of you aside from probably Googling you, or you want to send them to LinkedIn or give them an email address?
Yeah,
Or...
absolutely right. Yeah. So hello@strongersalesteams.com. Hello at stronger. Excuse me, that's that man called. Hello at
Yeah.
strongersalesteams.com, or LinkedIn, Coach Ben
Yeah.
Wright. If you're typing in the extras, there's plenty of me on LinkedIn. I'm not hard to
Yeah.
find.
And he's
Yeah.
Ben Wright with a WRIGHT, just for
Yeah,
those
that's
listening.
it. Yeah. Thank
So,
you. I often forget
so,
to do that.
so before I have you ask a question or two, tell people about this new prospecting thing, because I know it's interesting. It's 2024. We're all struggling to, get this prospect stuff down. So what do you know? What have you learned? What are you focusing on?
Yeah, good question. And where last year the number one challenge was getting the most out of people, I think if I redid that survey this year, what would come out is the number one challenge is revenue growth. And there's lots of ways to grow revenue, and we won't go through that now. But what I realized as I started to get more and more requests, and 1 in 2 of my requests now are around prospecting, lead generation, and networking. It's becoming really, really common. What I realized is that as teams, we've forgotten. We talk about sales training being sometimes just remembering what to do. We've actually forgotten the art of prospecting outside of being behind a computer, because we've got so used to it over the last couple of
Yeah.
years. And I don't
Yeah.
think that's necessarily anyone's fault, but it's a reality that we need to hit head on now. So working really hard with teams around how do we re-broaden our prospecting scope to be beyond just social media or the digital world. And again, I love frameworks. I love 3s and I love 5s. So there's a 5-step framework here around prospecting, which I'm assuming your next question might be tell me about it. So would you like me to jump in and give you these 5 steps?
Go for it.
Okay, excellent. So, and sorry, I might have stolen your time to ask the question there, but
No.
the first step here for me is, and when we look at prospecting and we start to think about what works, so often we talk about throwing spaghetti out at walls and just see what sticks. But for me, getting targeted with prospecting is really important, because we have a finite amount of time. And for every 100 people we talk to, we want the maximum number of those engaging with us. And so for me, the first step is all about understanding who your ideal customer is. Again, sales leaders will often say, yeah, we know that it's 18 to 39-year-old females who have a working career, they're busy, but they don't have time to look after themselves, right? That might be a health and beauty product. But it's really important to narrow that target market down, because once you get really clear on who you should be targeting, we start to look at the value that you're providing for them. And that second step is actually to say, okay, what's the problem I solve or the opportunity I help my ideal target market take advantage of? So we've picked out our avatar, and then we start to think about, right, what's that problem I'm solving or opportunity to take advantage of? Because then we can move into that third stage, which is all around knowing where we provide value and why a customer will choose us. And I move through those steps quite quickly because they're relatively straightforward steps, but they're critical in making sure that we're engaging with the right people at the right time and with the right offer. Who are we targeting? What's the problem we're solving? And why are they going to choose us? What's the outcome we're going to give them, right? If it's health and beauty, are we going to give them a better sense of their own personal wellness? right? What's that going to lead to? Well, they're going to be happy and more confident in themselves. What's a happier and more confident person in themselves going to lead to? Well, they'll get perhaps more job opportunities. They'll have a better functioning family. They'll have more time for they'll have more engaged time for their kids, right? Whatever it ends up in, and they're tenuous, some of those links, but we really want to be looking at the outcomes that we're providing and why they're choosing us.
That's great. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Well, the fourth piece here is by far the most important, and that's understanding where our ideal customers hang out. And I say the word hang out rather than where they engage, because uh, where people spend their time in business is often hard to get in touch with them, particularly if you're a B2B business. You have gatekeepers, diaries, people on the phones, teams surrounding them that are hard to get through. But if we can understand where they hang out often in a professional sense or even in a social sense, we're generally able to reach these customers with less of those gatekeepers being present. So we start to think about all those options we have that we can get in front of people, be it trade shows, be it speaking events, be it social media. That could well be one. Be it through connected networks, be it through areas where their businesses are presenting, be it through associations, be it through lots and lots. I mean, I've got a sheet, there's about 35 different types of prospecting activities on the sheet that we share. We then pick those and we work through the ones that are going to be most appropriate to us. And the fifth step being building out a plan. What are we going to do? When are we going to do it? Who's responsible? Who are we going to leverage in the team to help us with that? Right, if we're wanting to share, if we're wanting to tap into the networks of our entire business, the 200,000 followers we have on LinkedIn, how are we going to do that? Right, and when are we going to do it by? And then most importantly, what are the gaps? What are the things that are getting in the way of us having wins? Right, and then we go about getting those quick wins. Because once we have that plan, we often write a little number on the sheet, how many leads you need to get per week or per month to make that work. When we have a plan, we give ourselves focus and we can build out habits. Right, we talk about metrics, celebrations, and rituals. Right, those rituals can be built once we have a plan to follow. So that prospecting framework, I've delivered that with businesses anywhere from small scale through to $5 billion. In fact, my largest business has done that program, and the feedback that we have is exceptional because it just gets people to think about what they need to do.
Yeah. So everybody needs to give out what's your PayPal bin, because since you just gave away what you teach them, right? Like, everybody owes you $100 who's listening, at least. But Ben, this has been fascinating, and so appreciative of you coming on, getting up early, dealing with the tech issues, which now means I've got to go edit. Lovely. And sharing this wisdom, man. Like this is great. As we do it on every episode, we always sort of turn it back to you. Is there a question you want to ask? Like I'm happy to answer, give some feedback on something.
There is one that was coming up. So I had a good look at your surf and sales conference, call it a conference or a workshop that you have.
Yep.
Love it. Love the idea. Saw some great smiley faces from that session. Really interesting. You said on there what you will learn, right? Was one of your key topics. And as I'm reading through it, the first piece there was storytelling. And you called it something different. And apologies, I can't remember the exact words. But I'd love to know. In fact, this is a question I'm asking probably for your audience: is storytelling up the top of those areas that you're going to learn. Why is that so for you?
So the way we've structured the event, and our, Scott and I are two of the co-founders. We have Jeff Coleman, who's actually in environmental tech. You should go check him out, because I think you'd find what he's doing pretty fascinating. But
yeah, cool.
Just based on your background. But Jeff spent a lot of time in the political world and on campaigns in the presidential races. He was on the Obama campaign. He ran New Mexico, the state of New Mexico, here during 2008. And one of the things that he learned and then they taught was, how do you tell your story in 3 minutes? How do you focus in on the important part of the story, right? Like you talked about the 5 pillars. I called them your 5 pillars. What's the one, or let's just say, let's say we were talking about celebrations. How do you just tell that story in 3 minutes or less? And then how does it relate to your metrics and your rituals, right? Or do you, in 3 minutes, can you really do rituals, or can you really do metrics, celebrations, and rituals, right? Now, that's the essence. The reason we do it first, though, is that it's part of the icebreaker. Everybody we teach them this framework. Jeff has a framework that he teaches. And we have them, everybody goes and does their 3-minute intro. I think we've cut it down to 2, but they have 2 minutes to stand up and tell a story about themselves and introduce themselves to the group. So that's the very first activity, because we're there for 3.5, 4 days. We want people to get personal. We want them to have this intimate relationship. This is a small, micro conference, 18 people at max. And we want them to get to know people. We want them to hear a personal story. And so that's why that particular piece comes first. It's not about storytelling in the art of sales. It's about crafting the story to connect with a human. And the easiest way to do that for what we're doing is to talk about yourselves and teach the framework. That doesn't mean people don't go and use that framework later, right? We would encourage that, but it's much more about the personal human connection than it is, anything else. To your point earlier of like, well, where do they hang out? Well, for the next 4 days, we're hanging out here, and we want to kickstart that personal relationship. And we've had people tell all kinds of stories about troubles in their life, a major health issue, getting arrested, what their experience was like, which was not fun, but they were able to tell it in a funny way. So we've had people tell like really things that you wouldn't learn if we didn't ask people to do that. And the beauty of this conference and the reputation of it, which was what we wanted, was that it's deep and personal and meaningful. We have WhatsApp groups from all 12 of these that we've done, and every one of those WhatsApp groups are still communicating, right? We've been doing this since 2017. We're all still, hey, I'm looking for a job. Hey, I've got a position open. Anybody know somebody? Hey, anybody know somebody at this company? I'm trying to get in to sell them. Like, hey, how's everybody doing? I just got married. I just had my first kid. Or like, that's what we want, right? That's the reason and that's the reason that's first.
Yeah, cool. Love it. Building connections, power stories, eh?
Yep, indeed. So, well, Ben, I can, if you got anything else, you're welcome to ask, but otherwise, we're kind of at the end.
Loved it. Thank you for today, Richard.
Yeah, this has been great. I apologize to everybody for the technical issues. I'll figure out how to splice all this shit together. Don't forget the Surf and Sales podcast. It comes out every Monday, and the Surf and Sales event is coming up in November 2024. I think we literally have 3 spots left, which is amazing. So about a month ago, we were like, I wonder. And now all of a sudden in the last week, it's coming along. So there's 3 spots left. If people want to come, check it out at surfandsales.com. Ben, Wright, thank you again. Thank you for coming on, and thanks for sharing all this wisdom.
Thanks, Richard. My pleasure.